एक ऐसी माइंड ब्लोइंग बुक पढ़ी है मैंने जिसका जॉनर ही डिसाइड नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ। क्या था ये? एनवायरमेंटल बुक थी, कॉलोनियल हिस्ट्री की बुक थी या जियोपॉलिटिक्स की बुक थी? पर जो भी था एक्सट्रीमली एंजॉयबल और इंसाइटफुल था। बुक की शुरुआत होती है बंदा आइलैंड से, जो आज इंडोनेशिया का हिस्सा है, और यहीं से ऑथर एक बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग आइडिया इंट्रोड्यूस करते हैं, द नटमेग्स कर्स। बंदा आइलैंड में दुनिया का सबसे महंगा और इम्पोर्टेंट स्पाइस था नटमेग। बहुत अबंडेंटली ग्रो होता था, डिमांड दुनिया भर में थी और बंदनीज लोगों के पास इसका ह्यूज सरप्लस था। लेकिन यही अबंडेंस उनके लिए कर्ज बन गई। 17वीं सेंचुरी में डच कॉलोनियल पावर्स की नज़र बंदा आइलैंड्स के नटमेग ट्रेड पर पड़ी। डच ने फोर्स, वायलेंस और मास किलिंग्स के थ्रू कंट्रोल एस्टेब्लिश किया और इवेंचुअली बंदा आइलैंड्स की इंडिजीनियस पॉपुलेशन का बहुत बड़ा हिस्सा या तो मार दिया या आइलैंड से हटा दिया। इस बुक से मैं आपके लिए 18 ऐसे कॉन्सेप्ट्स लेकर आया हूँ जो मुझे लगता है कि किसी भी इंसान के लिए समझना बहुत ज़रूरी है। ये वो कॉन्सेप्ट नहीं है जिनको आप किसी पार्टी में सुना दोगे तो इम्प्रेस कर दोगे सबको, लेकिन ये ऐसे ज़रूर हैं जो धीरे धीरे आपकी नॉलेज में डेप्थ लाते हैं और कहीं ना कहीं इनका फ़ायदा आपको ज़रूर मिलेगा। एक्सप्लिसिटली नहीं तो इम्प्लिसिटली फॉर श्योर। मैंने इन 18 कॉन्सेप्ट्स की सिर्फ हेडिंग अपनी भाषा में दी है, बाकी मैं जितना कम बोलूँ और जितना ज़्यादा किताब को बुलवाऊँ उतना ही बेटर रहेगा सबके समझ के लिए। Myth of modernity, independence from material planet. We are today even more dependent on botanical matter than we were 300 years ago, and not just for our food. Most contemporary humans are completely dependent on energy that comes from long buried carbon. And what are coal, oil, and natural gas except fossilized forms of botanical matter? If we put aside the myth making of modernity, in which humans are triumphantly free of material dependence on the planet, and acknowledge the reality of our ever increasing servitude to the products of Earth, then the story of Bandanese no longer seems distant from our present predicament. Enmeshment of landscape with human life. For the indigenous peoples, the landscape of their islands were places of dwelling that were enmeshed with human life in ways that were imaginative as well as material. The land did not exist solely to produce tradable products. It was not land but land, the unique entity that is the combined living spirit of plants, animals, water, humans, histories, and events. For colonial powers, on the other hand, the trees, volcanoes, and landscape had no meaning, except resources that could be harnessed to generate profit. Neo-Europes. The prevalence of word "new" in the maps of Americas and Australias point to one of the most important aspects of European expansion. It was this aspect of European colonialism that the pioneering ecological historian Alfred Crosby sought to highlight when he coined the term Neo-Europes to describe the changes that were wrought upon flora, fauna, demography, and terrain of Australia and Americas. Transformations of such a magnitude could not have occurred without any planetary consequences. Terraforming. Terra, land, plus forming, molding. Molding the land as per one's need. Colonialism and conquest are of course as old as human history itself. What makes European colonization of the Americas distinctive, however, is the sheer scale and rapidity of the environmental transformations that accompanied it. Radically altering more than a quarter of Earth's land surface in a few years, it is here that the process of terraforming were applied most intensively, so that large tracts of land were re-engineered to resemble European ways of life. Great dying of indigenous people, virgin soil, conflict through inaction. What caused the great dying of indigenous people during colonization of Americas? A large branch of scholarship emphasizes the role of forces that appear to have acted independently of human agency, the most important of them being disease. Early European conquerors, so the argument goes, had acquired immunities to the diseases they brought with them. Since Native Americans lacked these immunities, the diseases fell on virgin soil and decimated indigenous populations independently of the intentions of the colonists. The other argument is that their susceptibility to disease was greatly increased by the multiple kinds of structural violence that accompanied European colonization, such as overwork in mines, frequent outright butchery, malnutrition, and starvation resulting from breakdown of indigenous trade. loss of will to live post-subjugation, etc. Sometimes settlers completely withdrew treatment from natives and allow quote-unquote nature to run its course. Thus the lives were jeopardized not by direct action, but by inaction. End of living and beginning of survival. Continue to contaminate your bed and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. When the buffalo are all slaughtered, the wild horses are tamed, the secret corners of the forest heavy with the scent of men, and the view of the ripe hills blotted by talking wires, where is the thicket? Gone. Where is the eagle? Gone. And what is to say goodbye to the swift and the hunt, the end of living and the beginning of survival? World as resource. Colonial powers work in the framework of world as resource, in which landscapes come to be regarded as factories and nature is seen as subdued and cheap. In principle, there is no reason why reducing any particular terrain to a resource should lead to its depletion in terms of either meaning or productivity. It should be possible to use that terrain rationally, matching ends and means. And yet that is not what happens. This is an inherent instability to the framework of world as resource that impels it to devour what it enframes. This is what happened in Banda Islands. Even after establishing monopoly over the spice trade, the Dutch were never satisfied and continued violence on its land and its people. Post-conquest blues. Once conquest is achieved, the conquered object gives the impression of being supine and inert. Having succumbed to mastery, it holds no more mysteries. The challenge it once posed to the conqueror's imagination is exhausted. It is the same presumption that impels billionaires to plan the conquest of Mars now that Earth is quote-unquote exhausted. What exactly is the meaning of Earth being exhausted? The planet's riches may be depleted, but they are far from being completely spent. What Earth is really exhausted of is not its resources, but its meaning. Conquered, inert, supine, the earth can no longer ennoble, nor delight, nor produce new aspirations. All it can inspire in its would-be conqueror's mind is the kind of contempt that arises from familiarity. Earth can act. Today, as we look at the floods, wildfires, and droughts that afflict some of the most intensively terraformed parts of the earth, Florida, California, the American Midwest, the southeastern Australia, and so on, it is hard not to wonder whether those landscapes have now decided to shrug off the forms imposed on them by the European settlers. It is increasingly clear that Earth can and does act, except that its actions unfold over scales of time that shrink 400 years gap between 1621 to 2021 to a mere instant. From this perspective, the climatic changes of our era are nothing other than the Earth's response to 4 centuries of terraforming. Gaia hypothesis, vitalism and animism. James Lovelock wanted to do justice to his idea of the Earth as a living entity in which atmospheric, oceanic and many other systems interacted dynamically. He came up with the term Gaia hypothesis, named after the Greek goddess of Earth. Lovelock's provocation was not intended only for scientific community. By calling up for the rediscovery of soul in material objects and earthly forces, he was conjuring up the specter of vitalism or even animism, the belief that humans are not the only ensouled beings. Fossil fuels reinforcing the structures of power. The reason why coal-powered mills began to edge out their water-powered competitors in the early 19th century was not that coal was cheaper or more efficient. Water-powered mills were just as productive and far cheaper to operate than the coal-powered mills. It was for social rather than technical reasons that steam-powered machines prevailed. For example, coal mills allowed mill owners to relocate their factories in densely crowded cities where cheap labor was easily available. The material characteristics of oil make it even more potent than coal in its ability to reinforce the structure of power. Coal's drawback was that it had to be extracted by a large number of miners in tough conditions, which could lead to minor labor movements. Unlike coal, extraction and transportation of oil doesn't require a large number of workers. It frees capital from local entanglements and allows it to roam the world at will. One of the main reasons steam engines won out over water-powered engines is that water rights were goods of the commons, and mill owners had to enter into complicated agreements negotiations to acquire them. In short, coal and oil won out over water, precisely because it empowered the dominant classes and was better suited to their favored regime of property. Choke points. One of the Over the course of 20th century, access to oil became central focus of global geopolitical strategy. For a great power to be able to ensure or hinder the flow of oil was to have a thumb on the jugulars of its adversaries. It is important to note that strategic value of controlling oil flows is only tangentially related to US's energy requirements. The fact that US is now self-sufficient in fossil fuels has in no way diminished the strategic importance of oil as an instrument of projection of power. It is the ability to deny energy supplies to rivals that is strategically of central importance. Petrodollar system. Petrodollar system is the second pillar of American dominance in the world and hidden hand of American hegemony. In 1974, a group of Arab nations imposed an oil embargo in retaliation for the US's support of Israel in one of the wars. In this situation, US reached out to Saudi Arabia and offered preferential access to American treasury bonds, in return for which Saudi would undertake to conduct all its sale of oil in dollars. The mission succeeded, and because of Saudi Arabia's heft in the global oil market, every other oil-producing nation also had to conduct its sale in dollars from now on. As a result, every country that buys oil even today must first buy dollars, and this cycle has become one of the foundations of the contemporary American economy. Folly of per capita carbon footprint. Per capita carbon footprint is calculated by dividing a nation's total carbon emissions by the sum of its population. And this has found a very wide currency. There are thousands of graphics representations of it on the internet. They invariably attribute the size of America's per capita footprint to intensive consumption. In this framing, climate change becomes a matter of individual responsibility and consumer choice. What these graphs and charts exclude, of course, are institutional emissions, like those related to the US military and to the projection of American power. That entire reality is simply conjured away by a graphic that makes climate change a matter of personal responsibility. It is as if ordinary Americans contributed nothing to the defense expenditure, even though a significant part of their taxes are earmarked precisely for that purpose. The divine angel of discontent. To the people on the far right, it is immaterial that the carbon footprint of a single American or Australian is equal to that of 35 Bangladeshis. But this is inconsequential because what is at stake is a way of life, founded on high consumption and defended by military power that can only survive if large number of poor and low emitting people are eliminated. Would the elimination of a large number of poor people actually make it possible for world's affluent to go on living as they are? The answer actually is no, because those lifestyles are predicated on metastasis, on endless and ever-increasing growth. This has been the fundamental ideology of the Anglosphere. It is this divine angel of discontent that has metastasized cars into SUVs and houses into McMansions. To white settlers, one of the most offensive parts of Native American culture was its incompatibility with the paradigm of ever-growing material desire. Colonial muting of universe. Colonization was just not a process of establishing dominion over human beings. It was also a process of subjugating and reducing to muteness an entire universe of beings that was once thought to have an agency, power of communication, and ability to make meaning. Animals, trees, volcanoes, nutmegs, etc. It is by representing a vast continuum of human and non-human beings as brutes that the colonizer turns them into resources, to be used as slaves, servants, and commodities. But now, non-humans too are no longer as mute as they once were. Other beings and forces, bacteria, viruses, glaciers, forests, and jet streams, have also unmuted themselves and are now thrusting themselves so exigently on our attention that they can no longer be ignored or treated as elements of an inert earth. Amazon's tipping point. Scientists have been warning for years that Amazon rainforest is nearing a catastrophic tipping point. The rainforest sustains its own climate. Its greenery generated 20 to 30% of the rainfall on which the ecosystem depends. Beyond a certain point, the loss of greenery will trigger a series of feedback loops that will destroy Amazon basin's capacity to regenerate and sustain itself. It will then turn into degraded savanna and bushlands. This fallout from rainforest to degraded bushland would be catastrophic for the entire planet, because the Amazon, which has long been one of the world's most important carbon sinks, would then become a major source of carbon emissions. Creation of indigenous peoples. The fact that an extremely diverse group like the New Bandanese could interact with their surroundings in this fashion give the lie to the idea that powerful connections to a place or beliefs in the vitality of a landscape are necessarily rooted in racial homogeneity, as blood and soil nationalists have claimed. For those who experience Earth as Gaia, as a living vital entity, a landscape doesn't spring to life because its inhabitants happen to share a common origin. It is rather the vitality of the place itself that creates commonalities between the people who dwell in it, no matter what their origins. This may well have been this may well have been the primordial process through which humans were indigenized and assimilated into landscapes everywhere around the planet. For after all, except for one small part of Africa, nowhere on earth can people be said to be truly native, in the sense of having come into being on that soil. Thanks for watching and do subscribe for similar content ahead.